Join me as I dive into the Twin Crowns series by Catherine Doyle and Catherine Webber, which features witches, royalty and bandits, and see if this series is for me. Hello, bookish people. I couldn't decide between book lovers and bookish people. I don't know which one I prefer. I just kind of like dip between them both. They both just sound nice. I like them both. But hello, people who enjoy books. This is another reading vlog. I am going to be reading the Twin Crowns series. So the first book in the trilogy was released back in 2022, so it has taken me a little while to get round to. But like I've said in my other videos, I'm prioritising getting to older reads that I may have passed up or overlooked to see if I can find some new favourites. I tend to gravitate towards dark, gothic, fantasy, fairy tale books, and this definitely is not that. It is fantasy, but it's not dark. We follow twin sisters Wren and Rose, who have had entirely different upbringings. So Rose has been raised to take the throne and become the queen, whereas Wren was stolen away as a child, and she has been raised by her grandmother to one day seize the throne, avenge her parents' death, and take revenge on the people who have been putting a lid on witchcraft and basically banning it, telling people it's wrong, and her goal is to get revenge and I'm guessing eventually make witchcraft a widely practiced thing again. I'm actually quite excited to read this book, despite it not being my usual genre. I really enjoyed Throne of Glass, which I think has very similar elements, the whole war, political intrigue, the trying to reclaim the throne, all that sort of stuff. So although it doesn't tick my usual boxes, I do think I might enjoy this one. So I am quite excited to give it a go. It's a new genre for me. It's a bit of a change, but yeah, I'm excited to see what I think. I'm very interested to see the character development. With these books being a series, I think I might get a little bit more connected to the characters and I might like them. That's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that the characters are so likeable that even if the heavier fantasy elements to these books, even if that doesn't intrigue me, that I'm connected enough to the characters to overlook that and still want to follow along. I do think there will be a significant amount of character growth with them being challenged in their beliefs. I'm just really looking forward to this actually. I want to stop rambling and being all like, I just want to read the damn book. So StoryGraph have a feature that analyses your reading tastes and compares it to other books. So I use that feature quite a lot before I go into a book because it will tell me whether it thinks I'm going to like a book or not, and then I really enjoy going back and being like, well, you were wrong, or you were right. I just find it really interesting. I like analytical things. So there are some aspects of this book that StoryGraph think I will like, and that is the witchy magical element of it, which, like I've said, witchy books are my go-to. Also the theme of I bit my lip. Also the theme of sisterhood, which I liked in books like A Pinch of Magic and House of Hollow, and also the adventurous mood. I like books where things are happening and it's quite fast paced and it's one thing after another. I enjoy those elements in a book. But there are elements that StoryGraph think I will not enjoy, such as the romance. I've said before, I'm not a romance reader. I would like there to be no romance in books. Sometimes I do enjoy the romance elements, but I would prefer them not to be there. And also it has a funny, light-hearted tone at time, which I tend to avoid in books. So StoryGraph have declared it a mixed fit. So it's not conclusive either way. There are an equal amount of things that I may love or may not love. So this is really a mixed bag. So all there is left to do is read the book and find out for myself, because StoryGraph have been wrong in the past. And I'm just excited. So yeah, I'm gonna go, I'm gonna read the book, and I will update you at around the 25% mark and let you know my thoughts. Hello bookish people, I hope you're having a lovely day. I am feeling quite unwell, which is why I am snuggled on the sofa in yesterday's makeup looking like this. Also, I don't know why my hair looks brown in this lighting, because it isn't, it's green. Anyway, let's just get into the book. So I am 25% of the way through Twin Crowns. I am enjoying this book a lot more than I thought I would. It's dual perspective, which is something I'm not like a massive fan of, but I'm not minding it in this book. I much prefer Wren's chapters to Rose's. So Wren is the sister that was taken away at birth. She's the one who was raised to take the throne and avenge her parents' death and get revenge on everyone and reinstate witchcraft into the world. So I find her chapters a lot more enjoyable than Rose. Rose is the one who has been raised as a princess her whole life, so she's had more of a privileged upbringing and she believes witches are evil. So Wren's chapters are the ones I'm enjoying the most. She's really funny. She just has some really funny interactions and some funny little moments. I have actually laughed out loud at some points with some of the things she's said and done, which is nice. It's nice to really like have a good time with a book. That's not to say I've not enjoyed Rose's chapters, because I have. They are really interested and I'm really intrigued to know where things are going to go. There have been potential love interests introduced in both girls' chapters and nothing romantic has happened, but I'm just sort of like identifying them as potential love interests. I could see the plot going that way, though I do think it's incredibly early to introduce a love interest, so maybe it's setting it up that way but it's actually going to go a different direction, or there's going to be some sort of twist or turn. I'm not sure, but I'm not actually mad about the love interest as one of them. No, actually both of them I'm really interested to get to know a little bit more. I am finding them interesting and intriguing and enjoyable characters. I actually think I am realising that I don't hate romance in books. Like I have said, and I stand by it, I would prefer if there was no romance in a book. But for the ones that I've read where there is a romance side plot, I have enjoyed. Like, I've not hated. And I'm feeling that with these, that I'm sort of like a little bit excited to see where it goes and how the interactions develop and if feelings develop. So maybe it is just romance books I don't enjoy. One thing I am struggling with a little bit in this book is the world building. Because this is a brand new world with a whole magic system and backstory and lore and politics and key figures, there's a lot to set up, there's a lot to tell us. I am not used to reading books like that. I tend to read quite low fantasy where the only magical element is witches, so there's not a lot of backstory needed, whereas this has a lot of backstory and I am struggling a little bit to retain it all and wrap my head around it. That's not a criticism of the book, that's again my personal reading preferences, but I am hoping the more that we get into the book, the more it's going to stick in my head. Another thing that I like about this book is that it dives straight in with the drama. From page 1 we are straight in with things happening. By page, I think it was like page 16, loads of things have happened, there's been huge developments, things just really go straight off the page and I'm really enjoying that. I like a fast-paced book, it makes it a lot easier for me to be gripped and hooked and invested. So they are my thoughts at the 25% mark. I'm really interested to see how I'm feeling when I'm halfway through. Right, anyway, I am going to go, I'm going to carry on reading, I'm going to get all snuggly again. I've got some reading sprints on, I've got a wax melt on. I will see you again when I am a little bit more through the book. Hello again. So I am at the 53% mark, so just a little bit over halfway, and this book just got so exciting. I didn't want to put my book down to film this update, but I needed to. I've just finished reading Wren's chapter and everything just got so much more high stakes, so really enjoying it so far. Immediately after I filmed my last update, so just after the 25% mark, things got really interesting. Wren's chapters started to get more and more high stakes. That seems to be the recurring theme at the moment. Wren's chapters are the most high stakes and the most tense out of the two sisters' perspectives, but I'm still enjoying Rose's chapter. It's just not as tense as Wren's chapters, but both perspectives are building momentum at the same pace, so it's not like Rose's chapters are slower or boring, they're just not as high stakes. I need to stop saying the phrase high stakes. Also, if you haven't read the book, this will mean nothing to you, but at one point I was really hoping that Wren and Celeste got together, which I don't think is going to happen, but secretly in my heart that is what I'm hoping for. I'm really wanting to know where this book is going to go because I keep thinking I know what's going to happen next and then something else happens and it goes in a different direction. So I'm really hooked, I'm really intrigued, I'm really excited. I keep getting to the end of the chapter and getting really excited by like the last line or some sort of reveal or twist or cliffhanger, and then we move on to the next person's chapter and then I get a little bit like, oh okay, we have to leave that one behind and go into the new storyline. But then as soon as I start reading the next chapter, I'm hooked again, and then I get really invested in that princess's storyline, and then it changes again. So I get this slight disappointment, but then immediately get invested, and it's just a recurring pattern because these chapters are literally, it goes Rose, Ren, Rose, Ren, Rose, Ren. At one point I did think I was enjoying Rose's perspective more. There's a lot of self-discovery in her chapters, a lot of growth, a lot of realizations, and that's really interesting to follow, and we don't get that with Ren. Ren is very stubborn, and she hasn't really changed her mind on anything since we started following her on page 1, whereas Rose really has grown and taken a lot of new thoughts and ideas on board, and that was really interesting to follow. So at that point I was like, yeah, I'm enjoying Rose more, but like I said at the beginning, I've gone back to being fully obsessed with Ren's chapters. Ren is really funny. I keep cackling. Okay, cackling's a bit of a stretch, but I do laugh out loud at Ren's chapters. She is just so funny, and her interactions with the other characters and the little remarks and the little thoughts and the little comments, they're just so entertaining to read. And I said this in my January TBR when I was talking about why I'm picking this book up, and I did say, because it's a series following two sisters, I did think that these characters were gonna be really likable, because they need to be in order to want to follow a series, and they have more time to get fleshed out, because if the storyline is spread across 3 books, you get to spend more time with the characters. So I was really hoping that I was gonna enjoy these characters and like them, or even if you don't like them, at least find them interesting enough to follow, and that is exactly what's happened. I am really enjoying these 2 girls' perspectives. It is reminding me a little bit of Throne of Glass. I don't know if that's just because it's the only other YA high fantasy that I've read. I wouldn't call it full high fantasy, because to me high fantasy is still things like Lord of the Rings or The Wheel of Time or Game of Thrones, those sort of things, and obviously it's not that. It's a lot lower, but it's higher than the usual things that I read. There's a lot more backstory and political context and all these kingdoms. What was my point? Oh yeah, it's a bit like Throne of Glass. I think maybe I'm comparing the two because of that. It's the most adventurous high fantasy type YA thing that I've read, but I'm enjoying the characters. I understand their motivations, even if they are slightly morally corrupt or they have flaws. I'm still enjoying reading them, and I'm rooting for them. Like, I want them to get their goal, and even though these 2 girls have completely different goals, I'm hoping that they settle somewhere in a middle ground. But yeah, it's just got so interesting, and I'm gonna go so I can carry on reading because I'm having such a good time with it. It's so fun. Hello, how are you doing? I am coming to film my 75% update of Twin Crowns. Also, I have dyed my hair. It was supposed to be like a really rich dark green. It's a lot bluer than I anticipated. I'm not mad about it, but it's not really what I wanted, so I think in a few weeks I'm gonna re-dye it and try and get it more green. Yeah, I just thought I'd mention the hair because it's vastly different from my last update. So I am just over the 75% mark of my book. There was a little bit of a reveal that I didn't see coming towards the maybe like 60-65% mark. Didn't see it coming, really caught me off guard, and I was like, no way, what? Like, why did I not see that coming? That's really interesting. I can't wait to see how that develops. Obviously no spoilers, but I just love it in a book when things happen that I don't expect, or there's a reveal or some information given that I just didn't expect to get. I have started to think, like, isn't there a really obvious solution to this situation? Is there not actually a really easy way for you both to get your goals? Can't you just do this? Why don't you just do that? That's frustrating me a little bit. Yeah, I'm just thinking, why has nobody thought of this yet? A romance blossomed around the 60% mark as well, and I did sort of feel like it came a little bit out of nowhere. It was obvious that a romance was going to bloom between these 2. It was obviously coming. The romances in this are incredibly predictable. That's not a criticism, they just are. But one of them, it seemed like it was doing a little bit of a slow burn, and then suddenly it just went to like from 0 to 100. I didn't like that. I was really looking forward to a bit more of a slow burn, maybe nothing happening in this book and it developing more in the next book, just building up to it a little bit more, deepening that connection, things happening at a slower pace, more organic. And I don't know, I felt a little bit caught off guard and I suppose disappointed. And then speaking of the romance, there are 2 romances. Both girls have their own romance and they are a really big part of the story. They are not background romances at all. They are very, very prominent in the storytelling. They are heavily featured, heavily focused on. So in other books that I've reviewed, I've said, oh, you know, there's a romance side plot, but it's a little bit like on the side. Whereas this is very much tangled up in the main story. Like, I would say this is a fantasy romance. The romance is a strong element to the plot. It's driving their motivations. It's really like central. I'm not hating it. I'm really not hating it. Like I always say, I prefer there to be no romance at all, but I'm not like groaning with ugh every time the romance happens. And to be fair, something happened in the last chapter and I was like, oh my god. My partner was like, what? Like, are you enjoying a romance scene? Yeah, I'm not hating it, but it very much is a strong feature. So if you are a hard no on romance, which I am not, I am a hard, I would prefer no romance, but I'm not a hard no on romance. But if you are, then this book won't be for you because, like I said, the romance is heavily tied to the plot. It's kind of hard to talk about my thoughts without getting into spoiler territory, but I am going to try really hard. At this point, at the 75% mark that I'm at, everything that has been building since the beginning has come to a head. Like, these storylines, as I said in my last update, they have been building at equal pace. They have been getting more high stakes, more tense, leading up to very clear things. And now those things have happened. And I didn't like the way that it happened. I thought this big moment could have been done so much more dramatically, so much more high stakes, so much more like, but it was very much like, okay, cool. Like, it was just very anticlimactic for me, which was a shame. But now I am left with this little feeling of like, okay, well, what now? Because it's this. The stakes are still high. There's still a lot to happen. It's still tense, but now I'm not feeling it because that big moment for me fell a little bit flat. So now I'm still at this sort of flat level and I'm just sort of like, okay, well, what's going to happen next? So I'm kind of wanting it to get a little bit more tense. I need something really shocking to happen to get me back up to that, like, what's happening, really tense feeling, because I feel like I've lost that. I think it's fair to say at this point in the book, I am still enjoying it. I am still invested. I'm still glad I picked up this book, but my hype has lowered a little bit. So I am in this territory of not really hooked, not really excited, but still enjoying it, still wanting to know what happens next, planning on finishing it today and then picking up the next book tomorrow. Right, I am gonna go and get some lunch and carry on reading. See you all in a bit. Hello, so I have popped in to tell you I have finished the first Twin Crowns book. I really thoroughly enjoyed it and I sped through the last quarter and then immediately picked up book 2. I'm not going to go into book 2 yet. I am going to wrap up my thoughts on the last quarter of Twin Crowns and my thoughts of the book overall, and then we'll get into book 2 in a different section. So in my last update, I said that the tension and the story was lulling a little bit. We got to this climax and then I felt like things started to slow down, but it really picked up again in the last quarter. Things started happening one thing after another. Everything started to get tense again. So it definitely picked up in the last quarter, which I'm really pleased about. At the 85%-ish mark, we got given some new information that I am really intrigued to follow into the next book. It was clearly setting up for something to happen because in that space of time, that thing couldn't fully be explored. So I know that's going to be what we're exploring in the next book. It started wrapping up some of the mysteries and some of the seeds that were planted, but then planting more for the next book, starting to open up more. It gave us so much intrigue for the second book, and it clearly worked because, like I said, I immediately picked up book 2. Obviously in this vlog I have to read the books back to back so I can tell you about them, but I know if I wasn't filming this video I would have picked up the second book immediately anyway, just because of the seeds that started to be planted. I wanted to see them grow. I wanted to know more about what was going to happen and how these storylines were going to develop. At the 90 to 95% mark, there was a good old twist that I didn't see coming, and it's really turned the tides and set up for a lot to happen in book 2. I know the theme of war and politics is going to be explored more into book 2, and as I've said before, that's not really my vibe, but because this series, or at least the first book, has been so light-hearted, I'm not worried about it because I know it's not going to be like really deep and serious. It's going to be done really light-hearted and in a YA way. I mentioned, I think it was in my last update, that there was like a really obvious solution that I was hoping the authors weren't just going to ignore and hope that we would ignore too. And luckily they didn't. It was addressed, and then there was plot development given that explained why that solution wouldn't work. So I was really pleased about that. So all in all, I had a really good time with this book, and I am really glad that I I picked it up. I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into book 2 and 3 and finding out more about where this story is going to go, seeing the characters develop and their relationships strengthen. I think I've learned from this book that I like my YA fantasy adventurous and light-hearted and with humour sprinkled in. So let's wrap up the book as a whole. So I really enjoyed the characters. I really liked their personalities and their quirks and the way they interacted with each other. They were really funny. They were really interesting. They were good characters to follow. I liked the side characters. They were all very consistent in their mannerisms and their attitudes. I liked the pace. I liked that it was fast-paced and light-hearted. It made it a really quick and easy read. There was lots of dry humour and sarcasm and quick-wittedness, which I like in my humans and I like in my characters. It was very high stakes. There was lots of tension, lots of exciting moments. It gets you hooked because so much is going on and it continues to go on. Like I said, there was only a little bit of a lull, but it picked up again very quickly. So it really does grip you. You want to keep reading because something is always happening. And then the one thing that I didn't like that I've already touched on in this video is the fact that there were lots of places and people's names to remember. Some of them I did sort of get to grips with as the book went on. Some of them I'm still unsure going into book 2 of. I've still not fully got my heads around like the different places and what they mean and who rules them. That's still a little bit of a blur to me, but it didn't detract from my enjoyment. And I think going into the second book, it will just become more and more clear. Like it hasn't stopped me from enjoying the book. It just felt a little bit like confusing at points. So overall, I gave this book 4 stars, which I think is an absolute win. Let's just get on to book 2. Got me upside down. So obviously I can't go into the plot summary for book 2 because it will ruin book 1 for you if you have not already read it. But again, I looked on the StoryGraph analysis tool to see its thoughts on how I will fare with book 2. Obviously for book 1, it said mixed. There were both elements it thought I would enjoy and elements it thought I would not enjoy. Whereas for book 2, it actually says this book aligns with my tastes, which is strange, but I'm wondering if that's because I've rated book 1 4 stars, so it's sort of thinking, well, if she liked the first one, she's probably going to like the second one. So the aspects that it thinks I will like are the twin sisters theme, the witches and magic, and found family and sisterhood, which was pretty much the same thing as it said as the last book. And I agree. Sisterhood and the twin sisters thing, like it's not a go-to. I don't think I've deliberately picked up books with that theme, but there are books that I have loved that have had those elements, so I can see why it's saying I might enjoy that in this. And then the elements that it says it doesn't think I will enjoy. It says romance, including love triangles. I don't feel like that's a spoiler because I have no idea going into book 2 what that even means. I don't know who that's relating to. I don't know which characters are going to have a love triangle. It also says royalty in kingdoms, which I agree with. I have said that before. That is something that puts me off in a book. And the enemies to lovers trope, which again, I'm a bit confused about because the romances in book 2 have already been established in book 1. So yeah, I think I agree with that analysis, but it's still saying that it aligns. So it's still going on the more positive side. And like I said, I have already started reading it, so I will get into my very first little review section. So at this point, I am just a quarter of the way through the book. I got to the 25% mark. And I do have to say, the first couple of chapters were boring for me. It's not too much of a criticism of the book because a lot of it was recapping what happened in the previous book. And I suppose seeing as the first book was released in 2022, the second was in 2023, for people who read the book when it was released, they have a year gap. So you're going to need that context and that refresher, and it does give you that, which I think is great. I do struggle when books don't give you that, and then you're like feeling a little bit lost going into it, like, oh, what happened? So I think it's really great that that is included, just seeing as I have literally read them back to back. It was very boring. Nothing was happening. And as I said in the first book, the action literally kicked off straight away. Page 1, we were into it. We were straight into the action and it continued to climb. Whereas this, for the first like 3 chapters, it was just recap and setting the scene. It was just boring. No, I can't read that bit because that's a spoiler. That's just a little note for me that I can't share. That's a shame. I have a theory, just a little theory about some of the characters, and I can't share it with you because this is a spoiler-free vlog. So then I made a note at 21% saying like still going quite slow. It's clearly like setting up for some things to happen, but those things have not happened yet. And I would expect by like 21%, that's almost a quarter, that things really would have kicked off at this point, and it hadn't. Like nothing had happened at this point. We were still just getting oh, I'm gonna go to this place, or I might do this, and this might happen. It's been a little, I'm not gonna say disappointing because I'm not disappointed and I'm not enjoying it. I was just like, come on, on, let's go. Especially as this book is shorter than the first book, only by maybe like 20 pages, but it is shorter. But then the last 2 chapters before the bang on 25% mark, things got going. The things that had been setting up happened, they started, things are now well on their way. I'm going into the 25 to 50% section and I know where the characters are, what they're doing, what their intentions are, some obstacles that might come up. Things are happening. We are into the blurb. Though that being said, there's a couple of things on the blurb that they say, this is going to happen to this person, this is going to happen to this person. One of those things has still not happened. Oh, is that a lie? No, it still hasn't happened. One of the characters, their thing on the blurb has just started happening. That plan has gone into action. Second one, still nothing. So I'm still waiting for that to happen, which I thought would have happened by 25%. I thought we would be into both of these characters' journeys and well into the story by now. But no, that has not happened. So the book has just started to pick up pace. We're getting into things are developing, things are unraveling, and yeah, let's see what happens in my next update. This lighting is just not a vibe. I cannot wait for lighter days so I don't have to rely on my ring light because it's pitch black outside. So I am at the halfway point of Cursed Crowns. This book is still not matching the pace of book 1. It's just taking so much more time to get stuck into the action. And it wasn't until literally just before we hit the 50% mark that it actually started to pick up. There were moments here and there that were creating intrigue and clearly building up to things, and the plot was like picking up speed. It just took so much longer than I would have liked. I just think the 50% mark is quite a good way through a book before we actually get into like the nitty-gritty of what's happening in this book. Now that we have got to the crux of the plot, I am hooked and I haven't wanted to put it down. I am really intrigued, I'm really invested, I want to know what's going on. Both plots on both girls' chapters have finally got to a really good point, whereas before, like, they were building really unevenly. Rose's chapters just weren't really doing it for me. They were just like a little bit flat, whereas Ren's chapters were like picking up speed. A lot was going on, we were learning a lot of information, a lot of exciting things were happening, but Rose's just like weren't the same, which is a shame because in book 1, one of the things that I said I liked was that both girls' chapters had equal momentum, and that just hasn't really been the case for this book. But that is not to say that I'm not enjoying it, because I really am. I am enjoying it. There's been no points where I'm like, oh, I hate this book. Like, I am really enjoying it and I'm glad I'm reading it and I want to keep on reading. I think I'm just comparing it very harshly next to the first book. There isn't as much tension in this one either. Like, there's not as much adventure and excitement. And in book 1, there were lots of cliffhangers at the end of chapters, and we haven't had that as much in this book. We have had a few here and there, but we haven't had as many. Something I am disliking about this book is the introduction of a new character. I won't spoil it, I won't say who or how they link in, but a new character has been introduced and oh my god, I really dislike them. I think we are supposed to. They are intensely irritating, but it just makes me not enjoy the chapters that character is in because they are just so irritating and I just don't enjoy reading them. So it is detracting a little bit from the chapters that this character is in, which is a shame, but I am very hoping they promptly die. There is nothing to indicate that they are going to die, but I would like them to because they are irritating me. Ren just seems to get the cooler plots in these books. Like, Ren's perspectives and Ren's chapters are so much more interesting than Rose's. She always gets the more high stakes, tense, interesting things happening, and that again makes me enjoy Ren's chapters so much more than Rose's. I am definitely a big Ren fan. Both girls' chapters are equally as good. The writing is good, the plot development is good. It's just I prefer Ren's storylines, her plots, her storylines, where her story goes. I just find it so much more interesting than Rose's. So I feel like I'm being really critical, and I don't mean it in a bad way because I'm at no point am I saying that this is a bad book. I think I am just comparing it so much to the other book, and I have read them back to back, and it's just the pacing. Everything else is fine. The plot is interesting. The characters are great. The writing is fantastic. Like, everything is still just as good as book 1. There is nothing wrong with this book. I'm just finding the pacing just a big contrast to book 1, and maybe that is because I've read them back to back. So I've gone from a really, really fast-paced book to a slower-ish paced book, and that's not even to say it's really slow. It's just slower than book 1, and I have read them directly next to each other, literally on the same day. I finished book 1, I picked up book 2 like immediately after. I think that's what sort of caught me off guard, is that I expected it to keep getting faster, but realistically, can it keep getting faster and faster and faster? So it makes sense that the pace has slowed. We're expanding on the first story rather than building. We have had answers from the first book, and we are now expanding what we know. We're learning new things, we are meeting new people, we are going new places. So it makes sense that it has slowed. It isn't a criticism, and I feel like because I focused so much on that in these first two updates, that it sounds like I'm saying, oh, I don't like this book because it's slow. It's not what I'm saying. I think it just has caught me off guard. It's just a big contrast, and I do wish that maybe I had taken a couple of days breather in between reading the books, just had that little bit of a break and then gone into it. But because of this video, I've literally gone in back to back. So that's all I have to update. I really don't have much to say at this point, because like I said, we've only just got into the crux of the plot, and I am really intrigued to find out what happens in the next 25%. Like, I am so intrigued. I am planning on finishing this hopefully tonight. I have to go out to Slimming World, but hopefully when I get back I can just get stuck into this book. But that's enough from me for now, and I will update you again when I'm at the 75% mark. Goodbye. Hello, I have popped in to tell you I have finished Cursed Crowns. Yes, I know I have skipped an update, but I just didn't have much to tell you at the, was it the 50 to 75% update? All I really had to say was I'm enjoying the plot. I didn't have any meaningful, interesting stuff to say, so I just thought, well, I'll just read on. I was hooked by the end of this. So like I said in my last update, things started to get interesting around the 50% mark, and it just picked up from there. It just got more and more interesting, more and more reveals, more shocking moments. I was really hooked. I didn't want to put the book down. I pretty much devoured it yesterday, like in the whole evening. I stayed up till I think 3:45 finishing this book. Like, I just didn't want to stop. So I know I have complained about the pace and how long it took for this book to get into the action, but once it did, it really delivered, and these authors know how to throw a shocker in there. There were some moments where I was literally gobsmacked. I was just hooked, completely hooked. There were just some amazing moments in this book, just so many things, and I was like, really interesting. I actually found myself rooting for one of the romances, again, not going to say which, and I was quite surprised. So the love triangle element in the StoryGraph analysis came to fruition. That was a thing. I have so many conflicting feelings about this love triangle, because one, I don't like look for love triangles in books. They're just not often done well. So I was just a little bit tentative because the romances have been set up. Why do we need a love triangle? And I still do feel that way. Like, was it necessary? No. I'd have rather just not had the romance in book one and then just gone into this romance, because I am here for this romance. I was so here for this romance, but then it made me feel sad, and I don't want to feel sad about like a romance plot, because it just made me feel sad for the person who like wasn't being picked, and now I'm like, well, this character has to pick between these two people. Someone's gonna get hurt, and I don't want that. Like, I don't want to read someone getting heartbroken when it's such like a pointless element of the book. Like, when sad things happen and they make me bawl, I love that in a book. I've said it before. If you haven't seen my review of Don't Let the Forest In, that reading vlog, I bawled and I loved it. The fact that it made me sob my little heart out is part of the reason I gave it 5 stars. But a romance plot that's not even like the main plot of the book, I don't want that to tug at my heartstrings. I don't want to feel sad. So I still do feel a little bit like, ugh, why? But then at the same time, I really like this new romance and I'm rooting for it. Like, I want this romance to work out. I want them to be together. But now I have that sense of frustration, because either they will and someone will get hurt, or they won't and I'm just going to feel disappointed that they've gone with the other person. So one thing I do have to mention, and it isn't a criticism, it's just a observation. And actually, before I get into it, I do want to say I gave this book 4 stars. This isn't a criticism of the book. It's not me saying like, oh, I didn't like it, it was rubbish. It was just a bit of a criticism. The fact that it's dual perspective lets it down in this book. It didn't in the first one. It really worked for the first book. This one, not so much, because the sisters are following such different storylines. They're in different places, different characters, and it's a different level of action. The different tones. So Ren's storyline is a lot darker in this one. There is a lot of significant key events that have massive like a massive impact on like not just her life but other people's lives, like the kingdom. Like there is big things happening in Wren's chapters. Rose's, not so much. Like Rose's chapters match the first book. They're adventurous, but they're adventurous, they're exciting, it's exploring new things, but they're just not very like, they're not as big as Wren's. And that's where it suffers, because we follow the pattern of Wren, Rose, Wren, Rose, Wren, Rose when it comes to chapters. We will have this huge thing happen in Wren's chapter and then go straight to Rose's chapter, which just like the tone is lowered so much, and it then makes Rose's chapters seem boring or not important, but actually they are, because the things that are happening in Rose's chapters are still big and they're still significant and they're still fun to follow, but they have more of that like fun, light-hearted, adventurous tone, whereas Wren's has like a darker, more serious tone. Even though there's like humour sprinkled in there's still lots of humour, and there were still some moments that I was just giggling, but they're just so different and the contrast is just glaringly obvious, and it feels like the energy just drops when you swap chapters. Like you will have this massive cliffhanger and I was like, oh my god, like did that just happen? And then we just go to Rose. And then I was like, oh, okay, cool, right, okay. And it made Rose's chapters feel a bit meh. And I think that's where this book suffered a little bit, because having it dual perspective means that if one storyline is going in a different direction or it's a lot more high stakes, the other one is gonna look boring. So that is the only, like, it's not even a criticism, it's just like, it's like I said, it's an observation, it's just a fact. I would be interesting to know if you feel the same though. Like, did you find Rose's chapters boring compared to Wren's? So I did enjoy this book, I did. I feel like I've been a little bit criticisy, but I think when the positive things are the same as book one, it's easier to pick up on the things like, I didn't like this, rather than just repeating the same things that I liked, because this book was still adventurous, it was still lighthearted, the plot was still really good, there were still really high stakes moments. Actually, like, the plot reveals in this were better than book one, they just came a lot later, and I still loved the characters. Like I said, there were some characters that I didn't like, but the main characters I enjoyed. This like blossoming romance I enjoyed, the reveals I enjoyed, like all of the things that I enjoyed in this book I also enjoyed in book one. Like there was nothing new, so that's why I think it's easier to be like, oh well, I didn't like this, but I don't want it to come across as I'm saying I don't like the book, because I did enjoy the book, and I'm really excited to pick up book 3. And I wouldn't have stayed up till 3:45 in the morning reading it if I didn't enjoy it. Like, I wouldn't have done that. I would have just like shelved it and gone, whatever, I can read it tomorrow. I didn't. I wanted to stay up, and I did. So those are my thoughts on the second Twin Crowns book. I gave it 4 stars. I am looking forward to the next one. The next book is shorter than the first two. I find that so bizarre. The first book is the longest. I have never read a series that does that. I will update you at the 25% mark. I don't really have an intro for the third book, because like I did with the first book and the second book, I went on StoryGraph, I looked at their analytical tool and what it said I would enjoy and what it said it wouldn't like. For some reason, it's not working for this book, so I don't really have anything to have a chat with you about before going into the book. If it does decide to work at some point, then I will just film the clip and stick it in here. I've got things to do, I've got books to read, I've got videos to edit, I've got food to eat, so I will see you again. What is this? I'll see you again when I have an update, and we'll talk about my thoughts on the third Twin Crowns book. See you soon. Hello. So last time we spoke, I said that StoryGraph, the analysis tool, wasn't working for book 3, but it hasn't started working, so I've gone and looked at my analysis and I thought I would share that with you guys now. So the aspects that it thinks I will like about book 3 are pretty much exactly the same as book 1 and 2, and it's the magic and witches element, the adventurous and tense moods, and the fast-paced nature of the book. And I agree, those are things that I enjoyed in the other 2 books. I enjoy them in all of my books. Hit the nail on the head, really. Those aspects of the book I will enjoy, I think. And the aspects that StoryGraph think I won't like, again, are similar to the first 2 books, and it says the romance focus and the love triangle. With the romance focus, it then went into detail and basically said I prefer books that have a broader focus, that I don't mind if there's romance in it, but it can't be the main focus. And it gave the examples of Flower Heart and Dragon Fruit, and if you've seen my vlog where I read Dragon Fruit, I did say that, like, I didn't mind the romance element in that because it wasn't really focused on. It was present, but it wasn't like a main part of the story, and I agree with that in Flower Heart, which is like a cottagecore magical. That was a really fun book. I had a really good time with that actually. And that one, it had a romance in it, but it really didn't play a big part in the story. Like the romance element could have been taken out and both books would have been the same. So I think that's a really good point from Goodreads, because I've sort of been saying in this vlog, like, I like the romance, but I wouldn't mind if it wasn't there. Like, do I like romance? Don't I like romance? Like, who am I? Like, it's thrown me into a little bit of a tizzy of what do I and don't I like, because I've always said no romance, but I did enjoy some of the romance in book 1 and 2. But I think it's hit the nail on the head with the fact that I like romance. Like, I don't dislike romance, I just need it not to be the main focus. And then when it gives you the big analysis and it takes everything into account, for this book it says I might enjoy it, which is different from what it said with the other 2 books. Because book 1, it said it's a mixed fit, and then book 2, it said aligns. We've had different answers for each book. I find that really interesting because the books, the aspects that it thinks I will enjoy and won't enjoy are pretty much the same in all 3 books. It's you'll like the witches, you'll like the tone, you'll like the pace, but you might not like the romance, is basically what it said. And I can actually report that I have finished book 3. I know, because I haven't even updated you at all. I haven't done any updates, but I just basically flew through it and I was really busy and I just didn't have a chance to update. So I thought I would just come down and do an update all in one. And seeing as it's the 3rd book, there's a lot less to say without giving any spoilers. So it feels okay to just do like one big sit down review. I hope that's okay with you too, but I was very busy and I got through this book a lot faster than I thought I would. In book 3, similar to book 1, it kicks off straight away with the plot. Like, it builds this really tense atmosphere from page 1 and then just dives straight into it. It was really clear what was going to happen in this book. They went straight into their objectives. It set it up very clear. This person's doing this person's doing that. It was very clear. It just went straight in with it. And it was really fast paced as well. Like, I got to the 50% mark without even realizing. Like, I was just reading and then I just checked the percentage on my Kindle and I was like, oh, I'm halfway through. Like, I didn't even realize that's how fast paced it was. Right. The love triangle. I really disliked that in this book. It really put me off. It was not enjoyable for me to read at all. In book 2, it wasn't as bad because it was setting up for the love triangle and I didn't enjoy it, but I didn't hate it. Whereas in book 3, it made me really uncomfortable to read. It just wasn't enjoyable for me at all. I don't want to be melodramatic, but it made me feel really anxious. And I don't know if anyone else can relate to this, but because in the love triangle, all of the characters had a really good connection and there wasn't really anything bad about either romance. There weren't many like cons. Everyone got on really well. They all had a really good connection. They were all really good characters. They were interesting to read about. And that made me feel really anxious because I knew one of them had to be let down. One of them was going to be heartbroken. And I didn't want that. I didn't want to read that. And it just made me like, oh God, like, who are they going to choose? It just made me uncomfortable. I've not felt like that in a book before, but then I haven't read many love triangles and I'm realizing that maybe it just isn't something I enjoy to read about. And I know that that is personal to everyone. Some people absolutely love the love triangle trope. It's something they really enjoy, and no judgment to you. That is absolutely fine, and you probably wouldn't find this a problem in this book at all if you're that kind of reader. I'm not that kind of reader. I don't enjoy it, so it just really soured this book for me because I wasn't having a good time during those chapters. I have only ever enjoyed one love triangle, and it was in an adult fantasy, and because of the nature of the book, it kind of went down a why choose route, and she had both men, and the series hasn't finished, but it looks like it's going in like a throuple direction and everyone's just going to live together in a happily ever after, and it just, like, that's great to me because nobody gets hurt, there's no fallout, just happy love. And obviously I knew I wasn't going to get that in this book because it's a YA, it wouldn't happen. So I just found myself really not enjoying those chapters. And the other thing that I disliked that came hand in hand with that is I don't enjoy excessive dialogue in a book. I don't like reading conversations. I prefer to read thoughts and then like snippets of conversations, and I need those conversations to have a very clear purpose. Whereas because during the love triangle chapters there were 3 people, there was a lot of conversation, there was a lot of having to create that, who are they going to choose, this is their connection, this is their connection. There was a lot of like conversations happening to show us the connection and show the turmoil the character was in between who should she choose. But I just didn't enjoy it. I found myself like skimming over the conversation because I didn't care. I didn't want to read it. I want to be in someone's thoughts. And again, personal preference. It's not a criticism, it's not bad writing, it's just something I personally don't enjoy. The amount of dialogue made sense for the way that the authors were trying to progress the story because we needed that for the love triangle. triangle. Just so happens I'm not a love triangle person and I'm not a dialogue kind of person, so it just didn't work for me. So in the end, I gave this book a 3.5 stars. That's the lowest rating of all 3 books, which it's not a bad rating. 3.5 stars for me is not bad at all. I know everybody has a different view on star ratings, but for me 3.5 is like in the middle. Well, 3 is in the middle. 3 is I didn't feel any particular kind of way about this book. Like I didn't love it, I didn't hate it. So 3.5 is on the positive side, because a 4 stars for me is usually like, yeah, I had a really good time with this book. This is a good book. It's just not a favourite. So 3.5 is like, I enjoyed you. You were a good time. You just weren't like banging. Basically. So 3.5 stars, it's not a negative, but because I rated book 1 and 2 4 stars, and I definitely didn't enjoy this one as much as those, like it just couldn't get 4 stars because it didn't live up to the other 2. And because it was the last book and I just really hoped it was going to be really high stakes, really tense, really enjoyable, like really, yeah, and it wasn't. Like it was just a 3.5, which is a shame, but it's by no means a bad thing. And I did have a good time with this book. It just, yeah, is the romance element. And like, hey, let's be fair, StoryGraph said you're probably not going to like the romance element in this. Like there's a love triangle, you're not going to enjoy this. And I went into it anyway. So that's something, I can't be too harsh on a book that has elements I know that I don't enjoy, but I read it anyway, because there are going to be parts of that book I inevitably don't like. If I was the type of reader who enjoyed a love triangle, this would have got a higher rating because the writing was good, the characters were good, the plot was really interesting and intriguing. But the thing that fell flat was a thing that I usually avoid in books anyway. So it's no fault of the authors. It's not a criticism of the series. It's a personal preference. So book 1 got 4 stars, book 2 got 4 stars, and book 3 got 3.5 stars. So overall, I would give this series a 3.75 stars. I really enjoyed the pacing, the humour, the adventurous tone, the lightheartedness. Book 1 was definitely my favourite in the trilogy. Book 2 was good, but it just didn't match the same like pacing as the first book. And then, as I've said, book 3 just fell a little bit flat for me because of the focus on the love triangle. So on reflection, I do think this was a really good series and I am really glad I gave it a go. The adventurousness, the lightheartedness, it was just fun. Like it was good fun. And I think if you're the type of reader who likes a bit of good fun, you don't want anything too deep, you don't want anything too serious that takes too much like mental and emotional energy. It's not that, like it's not that deep. You don't have to invest any part of yourself. There's no big words, there's no like loads of stuff to get your head round. It's just fun. Fun. The characters, they remained consistent throughout the book. There was no sudden out of character moments where, you know, they'd been telling us who someone was and then all of a sudden they acted out of character. Like there was none of that. And on the same vein, there was no like sudden character growth out of nowhere where they just suddenly realise and change. There was none of that. The characters were very consistent. There were some side characters, some of the love interests, some of the friends, some of the enemies that like, they were nothingy or they grated on me or like they seemed to be a little bit inconsistent, but they were side characters, so that's not a big deal for me. As long as the main characters stay consistent and true, that's all that really matters to me. So will this series go down as one of my all-time favourites? No, probably not. But did I have a good time? Yes. Have I learned something about my reading tastes and my preferences? Definitely. It has made me a lot more open-minded going into fantasy because the royalty, court, princessy, king, queen thing, like I wasn't keen on that element going in, but I actually didn't mind it. I wouldn't say like I loved it, but it didn't put me off. The fact that I was introduced to a whole new world, a whole new magic system. I struggled initially, but I got my head around it and I had a good time. So it's made me think, just go into more YA fantasy, give more a try because you might just surprise yourself. I did compare this to Throne of Glass earlier in the video, and I do have to say, like, it's not that. You will not get the same vibes. Throne of Glass is a lot more in-depth and detailed and I'm gonna say better written, but they have the same chaotic, reckless, adventurous characters and it gives off that same vibe of just like running headfirst into chaos and just fighting your way out with your swords and your words, and it gave me that sort of vibe. Lots of sarcasm, lots of fun. That's where they're on vibe, so I wouldn't say like expect Throne of Glass from this. and I wouldn't say expect this going into Throne of Glass, but I'm just like on a character sort of vibe. I think they are similar. I've tried to be as fair as possible with this review, and I do think I've achieved that, because the things that I have told you that I don't enjoy, a lot of it, again, it's personal preference, and I think I have tried to capture the positives about this book and who might enjoy it, because just because a book isn't for me, it doesn't mean it's not for everybody, and I've tried to highlight the fact that I do think this is a poor book, just some elements weren't for me as a reader. And I'm a very big believer that every book has its reader and every reader has their book. There is something for everyone, and that is like the beauty of reading. There is always something, and just because it's a miss for you personally, I don't feel like you should like slate the book and be like, don't read this, it's awful, unless it really is awful. So just because I rated this series like a 3.75, I don't think it will be 3.75 for everyone. On the contrary, I think there are some people who will absolutely adore this series and it would be an all-time favourite. I also think there are people who will hate this book if they are used to very, very high fantasy, very in-depth. This is a lot more light-hearted than that. So I can see why there may be mixed reviews. So I've tried to be fair and open and give my personal thoughts, but also try and help you figure out if this book is for you, rather than me saying like, well, it's not for me, so it's not for you. If that makes sense, I think I've done an okay job at that. So thank you for joining me on this journey into the world of Twin Crowns. Let me know down below your thoughts on this series if you have read it. I'd really love to know your thoughts and opinions, but just try and keep it spoiler free in case there are people who haven't finished the series yet. If you're new here, firstly, thank you so much for joining me, and maybe consider subscribing, because there will be more vlogs, more reviews, lots of content about fantasy books and discussions about books that we love or maybe didn't love. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and hopefully I will see you again soon. Until next time, fellow book lovers, farewell.